Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Corbin, and I work with the marketing team at Lexham Press. For today's author interview, I am happy to welcome Justin Bass, the author of the recently released book, The Bedrock of Christianity, The Unalterable Facts About Jesus' Death and Resurrection. Justin is professor of New Testament at Jordan Evangelical Theological Seminary in Amman, Jordan. He has also served as a pastor and adjunct faculty member at Dallas Theological Seminary in Dallas, Texas. And in addition to that, he's also publicly debated some of the issues discussed in this book with people like Bart Ehrman, Richard Carrier, Dan Barker, and Mufti Hussan Kamani. So he'll be discussing what he means by the bedrock of Christianity. We'll talk about early Christianity and why you can be certain about aspects of the early Christian story, regardless of belief or unbelief. Justin, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Scott. Blessed to be here.
Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to ask you, what is the argument for this book, The Bedrock of Christianity?
Well, one of the things that really motivated me to write this, and it's really been, I'd say, at least almost a 15-year journey, because I started discovering these things in seminary, and then I went on to get my PhD, and I was just fascinated by all the historical facts. I've always loved history, but just the historical facts surrounding Jesus and the early Christians and the earliest movement, the church and its rise within Jerusalem, and just that there were these certain historical facts that all scholars across the spectrum, because I was very interested in reading what the skeptics, what the atheist, agnostic, unbelieving scholars who were challenging Christianity were saying, and yet they agreed though with these what I'm calling these bedrock facts, that these are just indisputable, and it's not just even today. We're talking like the last 200 years, really, of a little over 200 years of critical scholarship, the facts that I focus on in this book that have been agreed upon. So I wanted to have those all in one place. There's been a lot of great books, New Testament books, apologetic books that have dealt with some of these issues, but I haven't found a place where they're in one book and just in one one-stop shop kind of thing. So that was one of the things that motivated me to write this.
So what are some of the elements? Again, you're talking about this bedrock. What are some of the things that, what are some of these indisputable facts relative to the critical scholarship?
Yeah, so I start with really the sources. So when we talk about, the New Testament is just, 27 books. And, for historians who, even if they're not Christians, if they don't believe, they just look at them as 27 documents, whether they're good sources or bad sources, they'll debate. But when it comes to the sources, so Paul's letters, we know we have 13 of Paul's letters in the New Testament, and 7 of those letters, for example, are agreed upon by all scholars that Paul wrote them. And not only that Paul wrote them, but the information that Paul is giving within those letters, as far as the historical information, like where he went after his conversion in Damascus, that he went to Jerusalem within 3 years of going there, of his conversion in Damascus, that he met with people like Peter, like James, the brother of Jesus, that he ultimately even had a second trip to Jerusalem and met with people like John, the Apostle John, and also James and Peter and probably others of the 12, and Barnabas was with them. I mean, it's an incredible thing. Many of the authors of the proposed authors of the New Testament were right there together, gathering in the early 40s AD in Jerusalem, deciding some of the most important issues of the church. And scholars agree on this. I mean, there's no debate that Paul is telling the truth, because he's defending his own apostleship to these readers, to this audience, the churches that he's writing to. So he doesn't want, there's very good evidence that he's not lying to them. He's wanting to say things that are true, so that they can't, the false teachers can't use that against him. So when it comes to the seven letters of Paul, they're agreed upon. We're talking 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Romans, 1 Thessalonians, Philemon, and Philippians. These are agreed upon by everyone. So those would be some sources. And then when we talk about the bedrock facts, we can talk about that when we get to the resurrection. But there are 4 bedrock facts that I focus on that everyone agrees on when it comes to concerning Jesus' death and resurrection and the extraordinary things that happened after that. That would mainly be the crucifixion. That would be the claim that Jesus rose from the dead, this absolutely unique, innovative claim that had never been said in the history of the world. It's unique in the history of ideas, and that certain individuals and groups believe Jesus appeared to them, and then also that this indestructible movement that still is the largest religion in the world arose right there where Jesus was crucified and buried. So those are the four facts that really deal with the resurrection, the focus of the book. But Paul's sources, the sources that are agreed upon by everyone are pretty much surrounded by Paul.
That's really interesting. And in fact, you even make the claim, following a lot of other scholars, that there are some people who maybe question whether or not Jesus lived, or whether Jesus died, or that there was this claim about his resurrection. What I found that was interesting and potentially pretty shocking is that you kind of compare these people to those who might deny the Holocaust, for instance.
Yeah.
So and I know that you're doing that as a kind of to make a point. But the point that you're making there is that these things are really not debated. Whereas there might be some people who maybe spend a lot of time on the internet, and they think, oh, well, a lot of the stuff that's maybe questionable. But from what you're saying, no, there's actually most of these things are indisputable.
Yes, and I use that, but I think it's an accurate parallel when you talk about Holocaust deniers, when you talk about moon landing deniers. I've seen recently that some basketball player says the Earth is still flat. So the fact that there are people that say those things, they do exist, and mostly they've been just sidelined to blogs, to Facebook posts, YouTube comments. This is where these people show up and make their ridiculous arguments. But when it comes to real scholarship, people that are professionally teaching across the world, whether it's in Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Oxford, Cambridge, it doesn't matter where you go and what faith background the person has. It's amazing. Even Muslims, some Muslim scholars, I found that actually write books about Jesus and things like, for example, Reza Aslan. He claims to be a Muslim, but he admits, the historical evidence shows that Jesus was crucified, even though the Quran says that Jesus was not crucified. So you see that these facts are so bedrock that they'll go against, in a sense, their own faith documents to affirm them. These just are indisputable facts that you'll have some hecklers on the internet say things, but when it comes to people who are educated, if they went on to get degrees, I'm sure they would end up changing their minds. But yeah, that's one of the fun things about it, to see just how solid and how immovable this foundation is of our faith.
That's great. So I want to talk a little bit about the resurrection. You already kind of mentioned this, but you recently wrote an editorial for CT, which touches on the resurrection and some of these things about the resurrection. So obviously the resurrection is central to Christian belief. It's central to Christian worship. What are some of the things that, again, in terms of the research, in terms of, some of the sources that we have, what are some of those things about the resurrection that, again, might be surprising or comforting to Christians as they're thinking about these issues?
Yeah, I like that word, surprising. One of the things that I really wanted to focus on that, a lot of people just don't know. It's just not talked about in the churches, sadly. You only learn it really if you go into the depths of these issues, maybe in seminary. But really at the turn of the 20th century, through really historical critical scholarship, scholars across the board began agreeing, this is one of these other bedrock facts about the sources, that within Paul's letters, as we were saying, they all agree Paul wrote them, but that he's quoting within his letters, within these earliest letters, specifically mainly Romans and 1 Corinthians, he's quoting traditions and hymns, Christological hymns about the deity of Jesus. Philippians 2 would be a classic example of this, when he's encouraging the Philippians to be humble, to look out for each other's interests more than their own. And he says, you should have the same attitude as Jesus, who, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, humbled himself, became obedient to death, even death on a cross. And then God raised him up to the highest of places. And then he basically quotes this hymn alludes to Isaiah 45, where it's talking about every knee and every tongue will confess to Yahweh in the context of Isaiah, but now it's every knee will bow and every tongue will confess Jesus is Lord. to the glory of God the Father. And an incredible, statement of Jesus' pre-existence, his deity, his death, his resurrection, his exaltation, and that he is truly God, and all creatures in heaven, on earth, and under the earth will one day worship him. That right there, scholars are unanimous that goes back to probably the first decade of the Christian movement, somewhere maybe in the 30s and maybe early 40s. That was composed, and Paul is then quoting that in Philippians. But we also have things that deal specifically with the resurrection. So 1 Corinthians 15 is the one I mainly focus on. It's what I call the bedrock source of Christianity. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul is relaying information that he had already given to the Corinthians when he planted the church, probably around 49 or 50 AD. And in that text, he says, what I received, I delivered to you of first importance. And so he had received this information sometime before. He obviously planted the church in Corinth, and he delivered it when he planted the church. And what was that information? It was this. It's in a creedal. Like if you put it together, like even in the Greek, you see that it's in this kind of creedal, organized. It's got beautiful symmetry of Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures. He was buried. He was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and he appeared to a number of people. And he lists Peter, the 12, more than 500 people at one time, James, who we know is his brother, and then to all the apostles. And then Paul adds himself to the creed. Last of all, he appeared to me. So like in that Christianity Today article, I focus on the appearances because really, even for Paul, this is the evidence. For Paul, this is the proof. And really, even clearly for the earliest Christians, because Paul, again, is getting this from probably Peter and James and the earliest followers of Jesus. So what was their evidence? If people said, how do we know Jesus rose from the dead? If someone, from Athens was asking Paul, how do we know Jesus rose from the dead? Well, Paul would say, well, one, he appeared to me. He appeared to me. I saw him. I was trying to kill Christians. I was trying to destroy the church. And now he changed my life. But hey, guess what? There was a guy named Peter, and he spent 3 years with Jesus, and he saw him too. I know Peter. I can introduce you to him. He's probably traveling around here somewhere. And also there's a guy named James. That was his brother. He saw him. He didn't believe him before, but now he believes him now. And there were 500. So, I mean, you can just summon these witnesses. And this is clearly what the early Christians were doing. And not just pointing to people, but saying themselves, I saw Jesus, and he transformed my life, and he can transform your life. And so then they would, clearly share the gospel about his forgiveness of sins and his love for the world. So, the evidence really, I think, for the earliest Christians like Paul was the appearances, was the fact that Jesus appeared to people during this 40 day period.
One of the things that, one of the quotes from the book that about these issues that I liked so much was, you say, even scholars who do not believe this event really happened agree that Paul is appealing to these living eyewitnesses as proof that Jesus rose from the dead. And then you quote C.H. Dodd, where he says, there can hardly be any purpose in mentioning the fact that most of the 500 are still alive, unless Paul is saying, in effect, the witnesses are there to be questioned. And then you say, Paul is in a sense saying to the Corinthians in the mid-50s AD, quote, go on your next holiday to Galilee or Jerusalem and meet some of these eyewitnesses. They will tell you what it was like to see the risen Jesus. I love that. And it's interesting because I don't think
to be that, and that part, I didn't quote that because that's a part that Paul added. He adds, hey, these 500, which was probably a part of that original creedal tradition that mentioned the 500. He says, hey, many of them are still alive, but some have died, but many are still alive. And so, yeah, exactly. I think that's why he says that.
One of the things that I feel like I hear sometimes people talk about, whatever, especially regarding the resurrection, is that it is a kind of myth in the sense that there were other types of maybe leaders of movements or messiahs or something like that, and that these early Christians were kind of constructing this based upon some of those things. You mentioned earlier when you were talking about the resurrection how there's a sense in which what Jesus was claiming was incredibly significant and was not something that was necessarily just kind of a common occurrence that was happening all the time. Can you kind of parse out the uniqueness of Jesus's work in terms of his death and resurrection versus some of these other claims that we see kind of within antiquity?
Yeah, it's an important point, because this is another one that, those people on the internet, the YouTubers and the people in the YouTube comments, and they love to talk about, these even like Bill Maher and his I don't know if you saw that religulous or religulous or however he pronounced it, but he's making these ridiculous comments that just come from basically YouTube videos, not scholarship at all. But basically that there were all these dying and rising gods before the time of Jesus. And now there is an excellent scholarly book, and it's written by a guy named Trivinger Mettinger, Mettinger. I probably have it somewhere. I have stacks of books near me, but I have it somewhere near me. But that book is the definitive scholarly book on the dying and rising gods in the ancient world. And he basically has an entire section on how Jesus' resurrection, the claim, I don't even know if he believes in Jesus' resurrection, but he argues that the claim of Jesus' resurrection is absolutely unique compared to any of these other claims. And there really aren't that many even pre-Jesus when you look at the sources. The sources usually are hundreds of years after even the time of the New Testament. So Jesus' resurrection, this Jewish idea of resurrection, which comes from ultimately, I think, other passages, but Daniel, that one day at the end of the world, Michael the archangel will come. There will be this time of tribulation, and ultimately those who sleep in the dust will rise, some to everlasting shame and destruction. So even the wicked will rise at the resurrection, and some will shine like the stars in the heavens. And so that would be the righteous. So this belief that the resurrection would come at the end of the world, I think we see this very, very common in the New Testament, but also in other sources, that this was the belief of the Pharisees for sure. And this was just a common belief among not all Jews. The Sadducees did believe this, but many of the Jews, the Essenes, definitely believed this. So they believed in this bodily future resurrection. But to say that a Messiah or any human being had risen from the dead now and life is just continuing on, this was absolutely unique. No one had ever said that. And then the other side of that is the other movements. I talk about them in the book, these other Jewish movements that we know about, mainly from Josephus, the Jewish historian, but also they're mentioned even in the New Testament. They're mentioned in the book of Acts, a few of them. This Egyptian who took these 4,000 into the desert to fight against Rome, these Judas the Galilean, another guy from Galilee, just like Jesus, he led a revolt against Rome earlier when Jesus was probably about 10 years old. He did that. And we know about the guy named Theudas who fought against Rome right before the temple was destroyed. We know about at least 10 of these messianic type pretenders who were fighting against Rome and even prophesying, miraculous things, and had followers. And then Simon Bar Kokhba, he was the last of these messianic pretenders. He was around 132 to 135 AD, and he got crushed by Rome, just like all the others. And after those leaders died or were imprisoned, none of their followers ever said that they rose from the dead. Never said that their leader rose from the dead. The Jesus movement, which has a lot of similarities to the rest, is unique in this. They're the only ones who said their leader rose from the dead. So the historical question is, why did they say that? Why did they make this unparalleled, unique claim that the resurrection that Daniel prophesied has begun in this man Jesus that we followed, who was crucified? I mean that can't. We can't set that aside either. Crucifixion was the ultimate shame of this time, to die in this way. And so a Messiah who is crucified is no Messiah at all. That's at least what was believed up until these early Christians started saying, this crucified Nazarene is the Messiah and he is Lord of the world. So you have to answer, where did this idea come from? It's absolutely a unique idea in the history of ideas.
That's fantastic. So I think I know the answer to this question, but I would still like to ask it anyway, just because, I think it's worth asking in terms of, bringing back, obviously we're talking about the head here, but kind of bringing it back for comfort. So how is, or in what way is this evidence in the book comforting to Christians, especially those who might be dealing with issues related to doubt or dealing with issues related to talking about their faith or those sorts of things?
Yeah, I tell early in the book, I think it's in the introduction, I tell the story of, it's really Tim Keller's story, the great pastor from New York. He got thyroid cancer a number of years ago, and he was healed from it, but he spent a number months in the hospital. I don't remember how long, but he spent a long period of time in the hospital recovery. And he said that he read N.T. Wright's The Resurrection of the Son of God, which I do have right here by my elbow. 750 pages of glory. It's an excellent book. I think it's one of the maybe the best book ever written on the resurrection. And I try to bring a lot of his, like I said, 730 pages. My book's maybe 250 pages. And so I try to bring some of his arguments down to size so we can all understand them. But Tim Keller makes the point that he read that book, and even though he was a pastor and he believed in the resurrection for a number of years, he said a number of floors just dropped within his heart of belief. He was like, he just really said, wow, it really happened. And I think for every Christian, when that happens, I think it's almost like a second conversion. I don't want to get charismatic on you, but I think something really happens when we don't just believe it intellectually. We don't just believe it because our parents told it, or we've always just grown up in a Christian home, but it goes deep down, and I think it's probably bottomless, that those floors could just keep going down in belief and depth of understanding. But when we have that solid bedrock of understanding of the resurrection, we know Jesus rose from the dead, and we know he's alive, and we know he on that cross died for us, loved us, and gave himself up for us. I think that just will transform our life and make us ready to face anything. I think, we'll always have, we're human, so we'll always have fear, but I think there's something about when Jesus is alive, when he's at the right hand of God, he's not in any way stressing about, coronavirus or anything else going on in the world. You will be immovable, as Paul said. This is what we should be. We should be, as Christians, we should be that example to the world. And this is why, the great stories of the plagues in the past, beginning with Cyprian of Carthage and up to Spurgeon in London, there's these amazing stories that I encourage everyone to go read, just about how the Christians were the ones who shined in the midst of plagues and death and despair. And the reason was always because of their understanding of the living Christ, that Jesus is Lord over heaven and hell, and he has the keys of death and Hades. He is alive, and so none of this can faze us. We are ready to face anything. And so I think that's the encouragement and the hope that we can bring to the world and to our own soul when we know without a doubt that Jesus rose from the dead. It encourages me. That's what encourages me.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. That's great. That's super.
Start preaching here.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
I do preach too.
Yeah, there you go. I can tell. Yeah, and so let's do one last question. So in like 30 seconds, 30 to 60 seconds, I'll give a little bit kind of leeway there. What is the elevator pitch? Why should people read your book, The Bedrock of Christianity?
As I said before, I think it's the one-stop shop where you can get those bedrock facts. But yeah, I'll say it this way. Blaise Pascal is one of my great heroes of the faith in the past, and apologists, especially with apologetics. And he said, we need to make men and women wish Christianity was true and then prove to them that it is true. And I think that's the model that really, I think, is what we need for a 21st century audience. And I do my best to do that in this book. I want, throughout this book, I want to make people wish Christianity was true, show them if Jesus rose from the dead, this is all true. All your dreams and desires, all your desires of meaning, of purpose, of forgiveness, of redemption, of hope, of overcoming death. I mean, all these things, immortality, this is all true if Jesus rose from the dead. And now I want to show you and prove to you that it is true. And so here's the evidence. And so in my book, I think you get this in other books, but I think in my book, you're getting that Pascalian type approach that I think is unique and not found usually, especially in New Testament and apologetic type books today.
That's great. The book is The Bedrock of Christianity, The Unalterable Facts of Jesus' Death and Resurrection by Justin Bass. Justin.
It's so good. Lexham did such a good job. I've been praising it to everybody. The cover and the feel of the book, I just love it. It's just it's excellent. Speaking of Tim Keller, it looks like Tim Keller's books. I love that.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny. Whenever I'm on these calls, these interviews, it's pretty easy for me to kind of talk about how amazing the production is and everything. And again, this book, it feels good. It looks good. A lot of really important, helpful information here. It is available wherever books are sold, Barnes & Noble, Christian Book Distributors, Amazon.com. And again, Justin, thank you so much for joining me, and have a good day.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to be here.